Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Winston's Weekly, covering all things property. I'm Manny Anton, your host for today's property chat. Winston, welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, let's get straight into it. And as usual, let's start with the US markets. We continue to see US markets trading around any data or sentiment driven by inflation, and that any potential impact that may have in terms of Fed moves. This week we've seen a number of labour market data points, so that seems to have dominated the headlines a fair bit. We also got some manufacturing numbers out of the US, which were a little bit softer. Together with those softer labour data points and the softer manufacturing numbers, we've seen yields in 10 years, 2 years, they've started to come down a little bit. They went early in the week below 4.5%. They're now slightly below 4.3, I think, the last time I looked.
Correct.
So they're continuing to trend down. And that's been a reaction to those sort of those data points. We should probably also add that the Bank of Canada came out 2 days ago and also cut their benchmark rate. And that was followed last night by the European Central Bank, which also cut the rate for the first time since 2019, I think, by 25 basis points. So it's all happening. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay. Well, you've got to look back maybe a couple of weeks ago when the 10-year bond rate in the US got as high as 455, 458. Since then, it's come back quite a bit. Expectations have sort of mellowed a bit in terms of when the rate cuts are going to start. And remembering again that we've got an election in the US in November, so there's timing issues around that. Now, the issue with the Canadian central bank cutting rates wasn't so much because inflation is was brought down within their target band, but it is heading in that direction, and they've effectively decided that their view is that inflation will continue to fall, and so it wasn't a case of it's within the band, we'll now cut rates. It's a positive view on the outlook going forward. Now, I think that's the same situation in Europe. Positive thinking about inflation continuing to come down. The US is a little bit different in that the US economy is very strong, and judging by the talk from the Fed, they still want to see a number of movements in inflation moving down, not just the one. So whether or not the US is going to reduce rates at its next meeting, not sure. The issue is, though, that after the next meeting, there isn't another meeting until August. So it'll be a long time before, if they don't cut rates at this meeting, it'll be a long time before they have another look at it. Now, that might be a positive because more data will be coming out. But obviously there's been a rally both in the US and in Australia in the bond market, and that's also helped the property sector here. The REITs were up just under 2% for the month of May, and so far this month, even though it was still early days, it's up about 3%. So there is a positive skew at the moment towards lower rates and the REITs doing well.
Yeah, that's certainly the what's coming through. There is, we should also highlight, there is a big number coming out tonight in the US, which is the US non-farm payrolls.
Yeah.
So that is a number that the US guys are very focused on.
Mm-hmm.
Be interesting to see what happens tonight, but if it surprises one way or the other,
yep.
You could get some big moves off the back of that tonight as well. So everyone will be watching that one.
Agree.
All right, well, let's. You commented a little bit already on domestic market, but let's talk about the domestic market and property domestically specifically. We had some GDP numbers out this week, which were looking pretty anemic.
Yes.
They surprised, I think. A few people thought, this isn't. this isn't looking, very good at the moment for the underlying economy.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
There's talk or suggestions that Australia could be heading towards a recession on the back of those numbers. I think that's a pretty tall order to sort of suggest at this point in time, but it is something that's obviously going to keep the RBA, the central banks, thinking about things going forward. But as I said, the sector itself has done exceptionally well. We had this week Goodman's has broken to a new high, and that's basically the gauge for
the proxy.
The proxy for REITs.
For the generalists, so they all go to Goodman.
Yeah.
Yep, you've pointed that out in the past. So, okay, well, let's stay with the domestic sector. One issue that has been raised during the week, which I've noticed has been discussed quite a bit in the financial press, has been some of the movements in the apartment market and what we're seeing there in terms of demand and the movement in prices up. Mm-hmm. There seems to be a lot of interest at the moment in that apartment space. Is that shifting from housing? What's happening there?
Well, apartments, it's an issue of supply and demand.
Yeah.
There hasn't been a hell of a lot of supply over the last 12 months or so. So demand is still there. We're getting some interest from ongoing interest from offshore buyers as well. So prices are holding up and are doing okay. I mean, but in general, residential is looking fairly positive as far as pricing is concerned. There's also talk of some players coming into the build-to-rent market, but that's more to do with affordability in terms of providing units that are within people's price points.
Okay, all right. And is there any way to play that apartment thematic in the listed space in Australia? How could you do it if you wanted to?
You could go to some of the straight out developers. Mirvac is the I suppose the go-to in terms of the apartment market. They've got a very good reputation. They build quality apartments. Mind you, they are priced accordingly. So the way to play that is probably through Mirvac. Stockland, whilst it's residential, is more land than apartments, even though they do sell some dwellings. It's not their main source of revenue. It's more land sales. So Mirvac would be the way to play if you wanted to be positive and feel positive about the apartment market. Mirvac would be the one.
Okay, has that been moving?
No, in fact, it's come off a little bit over recent times. It traded below $2. It's just got back up above $2 in the last couple of days. So there would be an opportunity there. But again, the main driver has been Goodman's, primarily because of the positive view. It's global. It's looking to do a lot more on the data center front, and that's...
And that it builds on the AI thematic as well,
correct.
I've noticed, so
Correct.
It's something that they are focused on. All right. One other thing, in other property news, US private equity giant Blackstone has agreed to acquire a raft of new homes across the UK as it looks to cash in on soaring rents. Yeah. So I believe they've bought up to 1,750 homes. Yeah. They paid £580 million for it. And it was a deal that they did with Vistry, Vistro in the UK. What are your thoughts on that? What's the what's the movement?
They've got a lot of cash to deploy in property globally, and this is just one of the steps they're taking in terms of deploying that cash that they've got to invest. Now that market in the US is quite large, and it's quite. It's in favour in terms of people who are looking to buy or move into these apartments, these dwellings. So
is this part of the build to rent?
Well, it's not
thematic.
It's not build to rent. It's what they call it family apartments, and they come along on very different, a lot of price ranges, from lower price range up to the top. So you've got a very good choice in terms. I mean, you've got to remember Americans are much more willing to move for work. So there is ongoing demand from as they move from one place to another and they buy another property or to live in. So it's a very strong market in the US. We don't have that sort of market at this stage.
Domestically, right.
But build to rent here is, I suppose, going along the same lines, but there's nothing really that's listed in a big way in the build to rent sector. A couple of the players, Mirvac as well, looking to expand in that area, but there's nothing meaningful. There isn't a single player that's available on the ASX to invest in that sector.
Okay, all right. All right, well, looking forward to next week and the next couple of weeks in terms of domestically. Anything we should be looking for, anything due, any material news due to come out on the property space?
Well, in the next couple of weeks, we'll start to hear about distributions for the June quarter, and so that's going to be something to focus on. And I guess the thing to watch out there is whether there's going to be any cutbacks or increases in distributions. I don't think there will be, so I think it'll continue to be relatively positive for this sector. But don't expect a hell of a lot of news in the meantime. There was one other piece of news from Lend-Lease in that they have looked to sell one of their US construction businesses. Haven't seen the price, but it is a start of their looking to move away from offshore markets and deploy the money into the Australian market.
Shrink to greatness.
Shrink to greatness, yes.
All right. Okay, well, just before we wrap it up, though, we do need to clarify a couple of things. I, for one, and a lot of my colleagues in the office have been shocked and disappointed to find that in fact turns out you're a Queensland supporter during Origin.
Correct.
So I think we need to understand what your rationale is behind that, given that you're a diehard Sydney Swans fan and Sydney resident, long-time Sydney resident, who's lived in the warmth and comfort that Sydney's provided you over all these years, and yet you've turned around and essentially dropped us like a bad habit, and
it's not a matter of dropping,
and supported Queensland. So I think it's fair to ask the question. Please explain yourself.
Well, I wasn't born in New South Wales, so I don't have the passion that you New South Wales people have. I was born in Egypt, but I did grow up in Melbourne, in Victoria, so I'm not a New South Welshman. And as a Melbourneian, I regard myself more of being on the other side.
Fine. Well, I guess it's an explanation. I think it's an unsatisfactory one, but
okay,
we'll move on.
Thank you.
So, Winston, thank you for your time today and all of your insights as always. And we will be back with another edition of Winston's Weekly next Friday. Have a great day until then. Bye.